Today's episode of the Beauty Industry podcast is in collaboration with Call Time on Melanoma. Hello and welcome to the Beauty Industry podcast, your online support community for the professional beauty industry. I am your host, founding director of Beauty Industry, Tamara Shaw. Here we are closing the competitive gap and speaking your language. This is a platform created and dedicated to the professional beauty industry, valuing community over competition. We serve to help connect you with inspiration from industry experts, expand your knowledge through educational pieces, and bring you the latest in product and technology innovation. This is Beauty Industry. Before we start today's episode, I want to say a quick hello to our international listeners. Last week we said hello to the US, and today we're saying hello to the UK, New Zealand, and Canada. Bonjour to those in France, and hola to those in Spain. We are so thankful for your ears and so warmly welcome you to the podcast. Let's get into today's episode, shall we? My guest today is Lisa Petulni, the former editor for beauty and wellness website bridey.com.au. Late 2018, Lisa ventured into blowing the whistle on melanoma mythology with a campaign titled #CallTimeOnMelanoma. Now a nationwide movement, Call Time on Melanoma is a non-for-profit initiative for smart women, providing education and Instagrammable content to take sun care seriously. I'm sure you've all heard of the client who says she doesn't wear sunscreen because she's sitting at a desk all day, yet drives 45 minutes to and from work in pure daylight. The client who thinks that applying makeup containing SPF 15 plus is enough to protect her throughout the day, or the client who has come in for a facial with a skin-coloured bandage on her nose after getting a lesion removed from her face. Here are some alarming statistics for context of this episode. Australia has one of the highest rates of melanoma in the world. Melanoma is the third most common skin cancer diagnosed in Australian women, and it kills more young people in our country than any other single cancer. And 2 in 3 Australians will be diagnosed with skin cancer by the age of 70. It is our job as professional therapists to educate our clients because the time has come to call time on melanoma. Here's Lisa and I.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
It is my absolute pleasure. And Lisa, I am quite a big fan of yours from your editing years. For those who don't know, can you provide us with some insight as to what your career looked like leading up to 2019?
Sure. Well, essentially, I'm a beauty and lifestyle editor. So I've been in the publishing industry for a fair while now. I think it's a little bit over a decade. Starting out in magazines, so that's sort of where I cut my teeth, writing and styling. But then more recently, I've been working in digital. So my last role was as a senior brand manager across a bunch of beautiful premium women's lifestyle titles, which you might have heard of, called Who, What, Where, My Domain, Birdie and Pop Sugar Australia. So I was made redundant actually at the end of last year. It's just, I think, called working in publishing in the Nine and Fairfax merger. So since then I've been freelancing and consulting and working on my new baby, which is Call Time on Melanoma.
Fantastic. I met a beautiful friend of yours, Alison Rice, on the weekend.
Oh yes, I love Alison.
Fantastic.
She's
I often
amazing.
speak another level. I often speak about her podcast on this podcast in being podcast friends. And I mean, we are obviously for the professional beauty industry, but often our industry also needs to hear about self. So there you go.
Absolutely. So, offline is amazing. So I'm really glad that you guys connected.
isn't it? So tell us more about Call Time on Melanoma. How was that movement born?
Sure. Well, it all started last year. Basically, call time on melanoma, which I say call time mainly because it's such a long mouthful. It's a not-for-profit melanoma awareness initiative for some smart women. And essentially, we share facts and first-person stories about melanoma and skin cancer more broadly, with the aim of inspiring young women specifically to reframe sun safety as self-care. And the backstory there, it's quite a long one, but it starts with my friend and former colleague, Natalie Fornasia. She was diagnosed with melanoma at the end of last year for the second time at the age of 24. So obviously that was really upsetting and devastating. And initially I just wanted to create a platform for her to share her story because it's so powerful and she's such an incredibly brave and amazing person. But once we went live with everything that we had put together, I saw crazy traction and just so much feedback. And that's when I realized that there was such a place for this, and we just knew that we had to keep going and growing.
Incredible. And so it's so interesting how you say sun safety as self-care, because often when you hear the word self-care at the moment, it's a real buzzword, and we kind of think about a green smoothie and a mindfulness app and, you know, all of this kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
But we don't actually think about treating ourselves and treating our skin, and sun safety is definitely that first kind of point of call. And gosh, that is young, isn't it? 24, and that's the second time she's diagnosed.
Yes. So she was first diagnosed at the age of 20, which is so young. So yes.
Very, very young. What was your process around creating it? So obviously you saw that there was quite a need for people to have more awareness around being sun smart. How did you then launch into creating the platform and the movement?
Well, I suppose Natalie's story is obviously what started the whole thing off, but then that sent me off on a journey of self-education. And then the more that I learned, the more I realized that there was this real need for melanoma and skin cancer information, but specifically targeted towards young Australian women. I think the thing is that young women are considered a stubborn group in terms of sun safety compliance. And the more I was looking at that and why that is, the more I just saw how we could contribute to changing that. And then as of now, I suppose we're one of only a few initiatives or brands that directly speak to that demo and share information. And then also through social media, ask what information they actually want and need in order to be more sun safe. So yeah, it just, I suppose it all came together organically because as I continue down this path of discovering, you know, even just the statistics are quite terrifying. I've been in beauty for such a long time, and there is definitely a massive gap in information that I personally didn't have myself. So then I suppose we can sort of, you know, extrapolate that if I've been working in this industry for this long and I'm in and amongst all of this sort of knowledge and have access to people who have this information and I don't know it, then what hope does the average Jane have of fully understanding, you know, and just being able to bust, there's so many myths out there about sunscreen and sun safety and tanning. It's, yeah, I think the more I, you know, dove into it, the more I was quite shocked actually that there was nothing out there really speaking to young women specifically.
Yeah, and specifically when you mention young Australian women, so I, you know, have travelled globally, and when you look at the French, for example, they put sunscreen on and look after their skin like they brush their teeth. You know, it's just ingrained in them. from a young child, yet it's so contrast when we look at Australians. We don't do that. And our sun is so much more damaging over here than it is anywhere else, and I think when we're younger, we kind of look at that freckles and we call it sun-kissed, however, it does come out as we get older, and definitely once you kind of get beyond your 30s, the skin has a memory and we start to see all of that sun damage that has been accumulated over the years start to appear.
Yes, absolutely. And that is such an interesting point that you raise, because you would absolutely think that, living in this country, growing up here, being exposed to slip, slop, slap, it's not like there's no one saying that sun safety is important. But yeah, there's just this real block towards compliance, and I don't know how much of it has to do. I mean, it's quite complex, but I think there's definitely an idea in Australia that sun tanning is sexy and quite an attractive thing to do. So that is quite hard to come up against.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely, as you're mentioning there, talking about the education, because I hear a lot of the clients that we treat as a professional beauty industry, young girls, but even all the way up to, your 45s plus, saying, well, I wear SPF in my foundation, which I apply on at maybe 6 or 7 in the morning, and I'm not reapplying for the whole entire day. Yet I'm driving an hour to and from work every day, and I sit right next to a window. For us in the professional industry, we just think that's absolutely bananas, because that's what we know, but I guess exactly as you're saying, the average Jane or Joe would not know that, UV wears off, the SPF, wears off after about 2 hours, and that there are so many different UV rays that can start to penetrate the skin. I'm wondering what it was about melanoma for you that made you want to be allowed over other health concerns. Obviously, you mentioned there, Natalie, being quite a personal and emotional tie for you. There are so many other things to be loud about. What made it special for you?
I think it certainly just started with Nat, and, she's someone that I really care about. So it was really hard to see her going through this second diagnosis, which brings with it, I'm not going to tell her story for her, but as she's explained to me, brings with it a whole raft of new emotions and things to deal with the second time around. So it was purely born out of wanting to support her and essentially to leverage the reach and power of those sites that I was working at the time. And then, as I was saying earlier, basically just as soon as we went out with this story and message, it exploded, and that sort of makes you take a step back and think about, I suppose, like, why that's happened. Because, when you're working online or creating editorial strategy and content, you are always aligning with important causes and, people's stories that are of value. But it's really just not that often that things get such incredible traction organically. So it does say a lot that people were so affected by her story. And, we had hundreds of people messaging to say that they had gone to have skin checks, or that they had, bullied their partner or their parents into going and having a skin check, or had sent them, any of the content. There was several different things, but Natalie's story was one of them. And there was also quite a popular piece on busting myths around SPF, which is so important. They're just everywhere. But yeah, that it's just sort of taken on a life of its own. It's really hard to explain. I think, yes, the personal tie is super important, but then it just has grown organically into this movement, and so many other people are super passionate about it too, which is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because it can really hit home when you hear the statistic of 2 out of 3 Australians are diagnosed with melanoma before 70. So if we had one more person on this podcast, that could be you and I,
I know.
So it's not 1 in 5, which is still low, but it's 2 in 3, which it really does, even now as I'm saying it, just you and I, and if we had one more person, that could be us. So it's so real, I guess, and close to us, yet we don't really recognize it until it has impacted either ourselves or someone that's really close to us.
I 100% agree. I think the more I looked into it, the more I realized that it's actually quite shocking. Like, I remember in the early days, I found the statistic from the Melanoma Institute of Australia that says that 95% of melanomas are caused by too much sun exposure. And that is wild to me, because that means that 95% of melanomas are preventable, but we're not preventing them. So what is going wrong there?
It's crazy, isn't it? Have you been surprised by the traction that you've got and the number of people that are speaking and posting and jumping on board? You said there that it's kind of just taken off very organically. Was that something that surprised you?
Absolutely. I think, the aim was never to do anything other than get this information out there, and hopefully by doing that, save people from making mistakes with their skin, or just encouraging people to take care of themselves in this particular way. So it has really surprised me and made me quite emotional at times, how many people have reached out. There have been many brands and influencers who have emailed me or come into my DMs who really are passionate about the subject and want to support us, and that is incredible. And then we had one person in our little community reach out to let us know that she went and had a mole checked that she otherwise wouldn't have bothered with, and it came back as a melanoma. So she had that then removed, obviously, and happily it came back all good, that they feel very confident that it's all gone. But it's that just means more to Natalie and I than anything else, being on Sunrise, anything else could ever possibly.
Yeah, it's those small little special moments that often do happen, in the DMs and in the shade, that I guess the magic happens. The attraction is fantastic, but when you're actually helping someone in a health sense or changing someone's lives and making them aware that it can be preventable, that's definitely something special that you guys are doing.
Thank you.
I guess as beauty therapists, we are the original advocates for sun protection and, from everything through to pigmentation and aging, we come from that point of view. But I too hear therapists say themselves that they don't wear sunscreen even after they might have been preaching it all day to their clients. What is it, do you think, about sun safety that is so unsexy and un-Instagrammable?
Yes, well, first of all, that is very naughty, but I think this is really complex, but there are, I guess, a few key points. So I think a lot of people, and particularly young people, simply don't relate to traditional sun safety messaging. And I think they also don't think they're at risk for melanoma because the education is either not there, or they're not, consuming the content around this, and that's a problem in and of itself. I think as well, living in Australia, we're up against tanning culture, which is so pervasive. I mean, I'm absolutely not here to say that fake tanning, there's anything wrong with that, because I do it myself from time to time. But I think there's definitely a feeling amongst some groups that sun tanning is not as bad as, you know, maybe people say that it is. Some people think that it's actually quite healthy. There's the whole tie into vitamin D. You know, some people just are skeptical, I suppose, of medical information or scientific information. So there's that. You know, there's the whole thing about a tan as a status symbol, which is really interesting to think about. I've just seen a lot of brands marketing their products using images of like really deep tan lines and things like that. So there is 100% the idea out there that tanning and sun tanning specifically is quite sexy and something to, you know, work towards. There's a lot going on to make us believe that sun safety can't be sexy.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I think it was Coco Chanel, gosh, way back when, who was basically the first person to get a tan, and then that's kind of when that associated with, well, the rich and wealthy are tanning. If you don't have a tan, then you must not be able to afford to go outside during your lunch break and things like that. But it definitely, there's a real problem when you do have cheeky brands promoting, you know, super tanned people to the point where you can see, you know, bikini lines and things like that. And, you know, amongst with everything else on Instagram being just unachievable, it's in your Fitzpatrick skin type, whether you tan or not, you know, and it is skin cells in trauma. There is nothing happy about a tan. And the vitamin D thing is something that we hear so often from clients in, oh, well, my doctor told me to get more vitamin D, so I'm not going to wear SPF on my face, which is just crazy because, of course, vitamin D is only absorbed in the areas where you don't regularly reach the sun, which would be, you know, your tummy and the tops of your thighs and things like that. You mentioned there that melanoma is the only form of cancer that can be prevented, which gives us absolutely no excuse not to cover up. There are some amazing brands out there now, like Dermal Hub, who has the beautiful UV protection visors. Of course, Soda Shades with Steph Claire Smith with the sunglasses, and Mattia, who have their long sleeve bikinis. So I guess brands from a fashion point of view and brands like yourself really are trying to do the good thing in preventing melanoma. Do you think if we kind of made it a trend, and I guess this might have been the push for Call Time, you know, to trend it, to hashtag it as much as we can and to make people more aware of it, then the statistics and numbers would decrease?
I believe so. I mean, I think it's such a interesting thing, and like we could talk all day about it, but I do think there is a really large proportion of people who probably aren't as unsafe as they could be because they don't like the aesthetics of it. And you know, sometimes it's as frustrating as it might be for, you know, people who work in the industry. The fact of the matter is, if you can't find a rashi that you like the look of, you're probably not going to wear one. If you can't find a sunscreen that you like the feel of, you're probably not going to wear one. You know, like, there's a lot to be said for making compliance easy for people and for giving them options. Obviously, sunglasses have been around. I mean, there's a million sunglasses and hats and that sort of thing. But I think I've specifically been super impressed with brands bringing out the sun shirts, which is a nice name for a good old rashi. But you know, Mato do amazing ones, and PE Nation I've seen do some as well. I think that the more brands who get on board, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly as you've said there, with regards to sunscreen, a lot of it just comes down to consistency. You know, I hear that all the time, or I was using this brand's SPF, but I stopped using it because it made me greasy. So I'm just not using anything anymore. I think,
Yeah.
you know, in a way, well, the very essence of it is that it is protection. So whether it's greasy or lightweight, you do have to, like any product, shop around and find
Mm.
the right consistency for you. And that's for the therapist listening as well. If your client's not happy with the consistency, then show them other consistencies or talk to them about how they might be able to, you know, add in a hyaluronic into it to make it a bit more water-based or serum like instead of a thick cream. So I think it is very much our job in prescribing skincare to understand the needs of the texture of the product and what the client is after as well.
Yeah, I think there is a lot to be said for remembering, as people who work in the industry, that our clients don't always have, you know, they don't have the access to the amount of products that a lot of us have had. You know, I have been very fortunate over my career that I've been given a lot of products through my work, and I know that I haven't had to spend hundreds of dollars trying to find a
Mm,
sunscreen that I like. So I try to remember that, you know, some people don't have $500 to go and buy a bunch of different brands to try those out and then decide which one works the best for them.
mm,
So I think just bearing that in mind, but then also I did want to raise a point about educating face to face about dosage of sunscreen. I think this is a message that Ultraviolet, which is a beautiful new Australian sun care brand, is preaching really loudly. Just, you know, a lot of people just don't really understand the nature of sunscreen and how it needs to be applied, when it needs to be applied. If you're going to mix
mm,
it with your foundation, for instance, how much more you need to put on for it to give you the SPF that it says on the bottle, all of that sort of thing. So I think, to your point earlier about sort of being the original sun educators and the front line in many ways,
mm,
out there for sun education with clients, it's so important just to remember that just because we have lots of information, you know, you can't really assume that
mm.
people know much, which that sounds rude, but
We
it's
get it.
there's
Yes.
there's a lot of there's a lot of, you know, myth out there, and I just absolutely understand how people are so confused and just dissatisfied with products that they've tried. It's very understandable that people just throw their hands up and say, I've spent too much money, I've tried too many things, sunscreen's not for me, I don't like it, I'll just wear a hat.
Mm. Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, if I can make a point to the therapists who are listening, is that sometimes to get your client the best results, I know we generally go for an exfoliant or a serum, something that's really hard hitting, packed with active enzymes and ingredients to kind of get them a super fast result. But sometimes we do just need to bring it back to basics and think that SPF is always where we're starting. That's going to control so much of what you're seeing in the treatment room, from your pigmentation to your aging, all the way through to, you know, inflammation that's within the skin. And we are lucky as an industry that we're growing and evolving, because we're getting antioxidants, we're getting, you know, your vitamin B's and your HAs and so many beautiful ingredients in SPF now. I mean, if you think about what we were using SPF 20,
Yeah.
30 years ago, it was literally zinc in a tube. So
Mm-hmm.
we do have access to so many beautiful products. I think sampling is definitely a way to go when we're talking about SPF as well for the client, if they're very texture dependent or specific.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. Your branding, I mean, we're talking about social media a lot here because I think social media has a very specific influence on, you know, who buys what and how the world reacts to different things. And your branding is stunning. You've got
Oh,
this
thank you.
beautiful, that's okay, you know, beautiful blush and kind of graphics, and you've got these beautiful photos of women. And I'm guessing that has been quite a strategic point of view, other than, you know, your kind of bright oranges and yellows that other Sun Smart organisations are going for. Did you have that in mind when you wanted to kind of plan the gram?
In a way, I think when I started out trying to figure out what that first shoot would look like, my main aim was that it proved that sun safety can be sexy. So I didn't want to, I mean, I was aiming to create something beautiful, and I hope that that's what I achieved. But yeah, I didn't really want to go into the traditional, you know, like quite bright colors that skin cancer foundations and that sort of thing use. I just wanted it to stand apart, because I suppose I don't even know how much of this was conscious thinking, but I suppose I was thinking that if that is not relating the message in a way that young people are responding to, then what can I create that will? And the other thing that I really wanted to do was to make sure that any Australian woman who is looking at those images can see herself in them. And by that, I mean, I didn't just want to shoot fair-skinned women with blonde hair and blue eyes, which happens a lot. Because as you might have seen, Natalie's background is Mediterranean, so she has beautiful olive skin, and obviously she is now living with melanoma. So yeah, there were lots of little things that went into it. I just sort of wanted to express a few things and make sure that people didn't feel excluded by the imagery, that it looked beautiful and engaging, and that it also, I suppose, expressed a message that melanoma can happen to anyone. You don't have to have very, very fair skin. You don't even have to have been burnt like to get it. So yeah, I think lots of little bits went into that. Yeah, and then we've just done another shoot which looks a little bit different, but it's sort of evolving the look and feel of the brand. So I'm very excited for that one to come out too.
Incredible. Likewise, we think you're doing an absolutely amazing job, and truly applaud and take our hat off to you for making Sun Smart very mainstream. What can we do to help you spread the word or get more traction for the movement out there?
Well, thank you. I think Nat and I are both in agreement on this one. I guess if there's a single message that we would want to get out there, it would be to start viewing sun safety as self-care. So that's slip, slop, slapping, getting your skin checks, and then just also being aware of your own state of health. And that is the message that we want to get out to people. So share that away.
Yeah, absolutely. And hashtag call time on melanoma for everything.
Yes.
And I guess,
Yes.
you know, as much as social media is changing, we need to interact with the page and like and comment and share and tag all of our friends who may be, you know, spending a little bit too much time at the beach, so that they can
Yes,
kind
we
of
would
see
love
some of
that.
those myths. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And what is next for Call Time on Melanoma and yourself?
There's lots coming. So we're busy bees at the moment. There's a website in the works, but for now you can find us at Call Time on Melanoma on Instagram. So we'll be updating there in a couple of months when some new exciting things are ready to be pushed out into the world.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to enlighten us on a little bit more Sun Smart information and education. And I think it's something that we always need to come back to as beauty therapists. And as you've mentioned there, educate our clients and just keep preaching the message that Sun Smart can be sexy and that it's definitely needed.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
I absolutely love that Lisa and Natalie are creating more awareness around being sun smart. Lisa and I continued the conversation offline, and Lisa mentioned out of all the products she has trialed and tested in being a beauty editor, the best anti aging product for the skin is a sunscreen. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please do share this with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who needs to hear this message. Take a screenshot of your phone if you're listening on a mobile device and use the hashtag #CallTimeOnMelanoma to start the conversation. Until next time, stay connected.